Good morning, lovely people, and wild foxes also. It's lovely to see you all. I always look forward to Sunday mornings for that reason. And here we are. We are now creeping our way. We're not creeping. It's going so fast into midsummer. It's like July almost gone, you know. And when July's almost gone, summer's almost gone. It's as fun. It begins and sort of you know, Bob Dylan's line, those who aren't busy being born are busy dying. Well, that's true about summer, right? It's coming and dying at the same time. But here we are. I had a few things bubbling around this morning that I wanted to talk about, and we'll see where this goes. I'm more confused than usual, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but um, I'll start with last night. Last night, I walked outside of my cabin for a minute, and and there were a couple of fireflies blinking around. And I love fireflies. So I watched them for a couple of minutes. And it reminded me, um, I had lived in Vermont for many years, and then I went to Arizona for for a few years, 4 years, and came back east to Maine in 1999. And we were living in a little, it wasn't little, it was a nice little apartment in Hollowell on the second floor of a house. And at that time, probably most of you remember, um, folks in northern New England typically did not have air conditioning. You didn't need it historically. But that turned out to be a very hot summer. And that little second floor apartment would get sort of unbearably hot in the evening. So what we did many evenings, we would drive to the coast down to Pemaquid Point area, um, and just hang out on the beach, on the rocks, whatever, until it cooled off enough to go. It was dark and it cooled off enough to go home. And as we would drive home. We would drive. Some of you know that area between Augusta and the coast, Hollowell and the coast, and but we passed some large farm meadows. And when I say large, big, like 50 acres or more meadows. And they would be filled with thousands of fireflies, literally thousands. Sometimes we just would pull the car over in astonishment because it was just all over the place. It was beautiful. It was far better than fireworks. If you drive that same route at night now, you're lucky to see a couple of fireflies. Fireflies are approaching extinction in this part of the world. And that kind of whole thing makes me realize how fast this whole reality of climate change and species extinction is occurring. I mean, that's such a relatively short period of time since those summers that I remember coming back, 25 years from, again, I mean, not just thousands, maybe tens of thousands. These meadows would just light up. And if you go by there now, you're lucky to see a couple of little lips. So I very what much appreciate the fireflies that are in my yard right now, but there are only a couple. You know, even that as a kid, remember some of you may remember going out with a jar and collecting fireflies. That's why they're extinct today because we all went out and put them in little jars. No, but anyway, now so it brings it home for me the reality of change and how rapid it is. Just in a short piece of, I mean, our lifespans are so short, and now we're just talking about a segment of that, a small segment of that. And the weather here, in I associate summer in northern New England with many cool, not cool, but not extremely hot days, blue skies, white clouds, lots of days when you feel like getting outside and doing things. And now it seems that summer has become a succession of often cloudy days, high humidity, punctuated by stretches of really hot days. We're going, where I'm in the mid coast. That certainly we've gotten to the mid 90s already this year several times, and um, again, so thankfully we have the coast as a refuge, just as it was for me back then when I was living in Hollowell. But changing so fast. And then when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about this, I was thinking about the fireflies, and then I was thinking, I only need to say one word, Texas, and you'll all know what a horrible, horrible disaster that was in Texas just now, just the last week. Another consequence of changing climate. And it makes me think I got nothing to complain about if I'm getting a few more humid, cloudy days or hot days or whatever relative to a catastrophe like that. Just an awful thing. And that's, in a sense, that what's happened in Texas over the last couple of weeks is a microcosm of the whole story of what's happening in the world in this country today, because we've got this intersection of climate, of politics, and of human suffering, enormous human suffering as a consequence of climate, and then it gets politicized. We can't like leave it alone. It gets drawn into all of the contentious debates of this moment. What has prepared us, what can prepare us to live in this world today, to live with these kinds of circumstances, with these kinds of rapid, rapid evolutionary changes. Certainly not in our DNA and our epigenetics. This is, this has not been the human experience. By and large, the human experience has been things changing slowly. So it's as if our systems are in perpetual shock, a perpetual state of dysregulation. As things continue to change and evolve at this astonishing pace. And look at now in the other side, we have things like AI also furthering rapid evolution in a technological sense, in a social sense. We're not prepared for it. Was it Marshall McLuhan back in the 70s talked about future shock? Future shock now is waking up in the morning and see what changed since what happened yesterday. Astounding. At some level, it's so far beyond our comprehension and so terrifying that it tempts us to shut down, to shut off. The right uses the word woke as sort of a slur, as sort of a bad thing, right? Well, maybe it is. Being woke isn't such a hot deal. Maybe it's far easier, it's certainly far easier to sleep through these things, to ignore them. And yet, there it is right in our face, the lives of those children in Texas. Beautiful children. And if we take a Buddhist perspective, that's not somebody else's karma, that's our karma. We are not separate, right? We are not separate. So we can easily blame the fossil fuel companies. We can blame Governor Greg Abbott. We can blame the administration in Washington and so on and so forth. But we are also complicit. We also have responsibility. WTF, as the Buddha said. So where does that put us? That as if we truly appreciate the teaching of the Buddha, if we truly acknowledge the idea of one body, then we're right smack in the center. We're right smack in the center. We can't shut it off. We can't pretend it's not happening. And we can't fail to take responsibility and act. Same way if I'm walking down the street and somebody drops a piece of paper and they're oblivious and they go on their way. How do I respond to that? Well, I can ignore it. I can say, well, that's their piece of paper. I didn't drop it on the sidewalk and keep going. Or I can say, it's my sidewalk. And it is, and I do have responsibility. And I do need to pick up that piece of paper because if I don't, then that sidewalk is going to become more and more littered. How do we pick up that piece of paper? I don't know. That's our continual challenge. Because we're not talking about pieces of paper being dropped. We're talking about whole species going extinct. We're talking about the fireflies disappearing. We're talking about children in Texas being killed. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in many respects. It's an interesting discussion. I'm working with a student this summer. I won't say too much about him because I don't want to identify him, but I will say that he is a university professor and a scientist and an ecologist. And we're having this. He's having this discussion in his head, in his life, right? How do we go forward? How do we react? How do we interact? What can we say? What can we do? At this very moment, one of the great heroes of eco-dharma, of Buddha Dharma related to ecology, Joanna Macy is dying. She's in hospice. And I mean, she's not a young woman. She's in her 90s. But nevertheless, she's in the Buddhist world. She's been one of the champions for eco-dharma. When I was meeting with this man the other day, this professor, yeah, he kind of asked me what I thought about eco-dharma. I think eco-dharma is an oxymoron. All dharma should be eco-dharma. All dharma is about protecting and preserving life. All dharma is about acknowledging the truth of the one body. All dharma is about taking responsibility for the one body. All dharma is about picking up the piece of paper, not leaving it on the street when we come across it. All dharma is about preserving and protecting life. All dharma is about embracing and loving this world that we live in. So to me, it doesn't even make sense to talk about eco-dharma, but just dharma. there are koans that kind of point to this question, to this moment, to this dilemma. How will we step off from the top of the 100-foot pole? When we realize the truth of our reality today, we're atop that pole. How will we step off? How will we act? How will we manifest the Dharma? So that actually brings me to a koan. Having traveled around the barn a little here. The sixth patriarch was once pursued by the monk Myo as far as Mount Dayu. The patriarch, seeing Myo coming, laid the robe and bowl on a rock and said, "This robe represents the faith. How can it be competed for by force? I will allow you to take it away." Myo tried to lift it up, but it was immovable as a mountain. Terrified and trembling with awe, he said, "I came for the Dharma, not the robe. I beg you, brother, please reveal it to me." The patriarch said, "At the very moment you were chasing after me, without thinking good or evil, what was the primal face of Monk Myo?" In that instant, Myo suddenly attained deep realization, and his whole body was covered in sweat. In tears, he bowed and said, "Besides the secret words and secret meaning you have just revealed to me, is there anything else deeper yet?" The patriarch said, "What I have now preached to you is no secret at all. If you reflect on your own true face, the secret will be found within yourself." Myo said, "Though I have been at Obai with the other monks, I have never realized what my true self is." Excuse me, Mike. Gotta move my foot. It's very falling asleep at home. I've never realized what my true self is. Now, thanks to your instruction, I know it is like a man who drinks water and knows for himself whether it is cold or warm. Now you, lay brother, are my master. The patriarch said, "If that is the way you feel, let us both have Obai for our master. Be mindful and hold fast to what you have realized." So the line that's critical in this koan, having leg problems, okay, is the one where the patriarch says, "At the very moment you were chasing after me without thinking good or evil, what was the primal face of Monk Myo?" Now, Monk Myo's intentions were not good. We know that. Those who are not familiar with this context, Myo was out to kill Huineng, um, literally, because he had been given transmission. He had been given the robe and the bowl in the middle of the night by Obai, and had literally had to flee because there would be so much anger and jealousy among the other monks. And that's what Myo was expressing. So his intentions were not good. But nevertheless, what Huineng is pointing to is in those moments of pursuit where he was totally wrapped up, totally engrossed in acting and living not in thinking and intellectualizing and planning. He was expressing his true self, expressing the Dharma. So this is the answer to the whole dilemma, to the whole question of how we react, how do we respond? We see the piece of paper in the street and we pick it up. How does that manifest? It manifests in our lives in infinite ways. The point is the clear response in the moment, not abdicating our responsibility, but recognizing our responsibility, not constructing a narrative on which to act, but acting clearly and directly. We see the piece of paper, we pick it up. Sometimes it's so simple. One of the reasons that fireflies are dying off. I mean, obviously the agrochemicals and so on are part of that picture. But in a lot of areas of the country, there are no agrochemicals. It's people obsessively removing all the leaf litter from their yards because that's where the fireflies winter and reproduce. Many, many years ago, I was working on a project, and one of the people working on the project, nobody told Deborah Kennelly that we're starting at 9 o'clock.
Sorry.
That she's on Vermont time, and she.
I went to your website. And it said 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Does the website lie? Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm here.
Well, welcome. Good to see you. Yeah. So I was working with this woman on a project, and she was kind of a fairly senior person at EPA. And some of you remember we had this thing called the EPA, which meant Environmental Protection Agency. And actually, there were people attempting to protect the environment at that time. This was in, I think, the 80s. And she said at that time that the household lawn was one of the major environmental catastrophes. And we're finding that out. The household lawn is a desert. It's not a place where things live. It's not, and by golly, if they start living there, we're going to get some pesticides and take care of that. And if the grasses start to grow, we're going to cut them right down, So somehow we created this idea of creating an external carpet. Well, that external carpet is not a habitat. It's not so conspicuous here in Maine, but if you go to some place like Long Island or, any of the major suburban areas, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of lawn, right? So my point with that simply is that sometimes the environmental crisis comes home to us and another person who didn't pay attention to the memo. Okay. I'm very sorry about this. How did we notify people, RJ?
I had sent an email a couple of weeks ago
Okay,
to
so
the mailing
email.
list.
Deborah and Doug, are you on the email list? Do you get Wild Fox emails?
I thought so.
After a recent hiccup, yes, I did get well, Gary had to re-invite me, and I don't recall if he did or not, but it's in the works. I'll check in with Gary just to make sure.
Okay, so that you might have, your hiatus might have coincided with RJ sending out the memo.
Yeah.
And consider me like Doug. I'm like Doug.
Deborah and Doug.
You're what, Deborah?
Consider me in the same situation as Doug. Maybe
As in
Gary
Doug, you
needs to re-invite me.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Deb, for the interruptions.
No. I'm sorry that you didn't get the notification. And you missed the best Dharma talk ever. And we didn't record it today, so it's gone.
Oh, so the notice that you're referring to is essentially, so I just missed the Dharma talk.
You
Yeah,
just
I'm connecting the dots, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Fabulous Dharma talk.
Of course.
No, it was my usual confused rambling and going on. I don't know what, sort of tangential to the eco crisis and to what's happened in Texas in the recent days. And so maybe this is a good point to start the discussion and discuss richly, so Doug and Deborah will get up to speed.
Let me just say that anyone who thinks they are not getting the emails, please send me an email at gary@garyrobinson.net, not .com or .org, but .net. Gary@garyrobinson.net.
Done.
And just very briefly to summarize, kind of recap in the most simple terms, what I did in the talk was I was connecting the absence of fireflies in Maine to the death of all those young people in Texas, and how rapidly the world is changing, and the question of how we as Zen Buddhists respond. And didn't quite answer that, but the analogy that I came up with is if you're walking down the street and somebody has just dropped a piece of paper, well, we have a couple of choices. One, we can say, oh, that's their piece of paper and keep on walking. Or two, we can stop. We can pick the paper up and say, it's my street and I need to take care of the piece of paper, which is it's kind of a ridiculously simple analog, but I was relating it to the koan about not thinking good or evil with the monk Mayo, which you may or may not be familiar with. And that's about intimate action. What that koan is really pointing to is responding not from here or even from here, but from an intimate relationship to the world. And certainly not an analytical relationship. So what's in that moment? We know what to do. In that moment, we know we need to pick up the paper. And then we cancel it out. We go, oh, it's not my piece of paper. I'm kind of late for my appointment and blah, blah, We create our narrative that obscures the truth that we knew all along.
If I could be presumptuous jumping in here in the last 3 minutes.
No, we won't. We'll go on as long as people will tolerate it. We're going to go on. We haven't had any discussion yet, so.
Well, based on what you just said, Peter, it reminds me of something that Marcus Aurelius said, and he said that if it's not good for the hive, it's not good for the bee. And I was just telling my nephew about this idea last weekend, and I love so many things about that little nugget of wisdom, not the least of which is he puts the community of the hive before the individual of the bee. And it's a time of great, America has always been a very individualistic culture and society, and we're at an extreme fringe of it these days. But to your point of picking up the paper, is what all I'm trying to say is that's taking care of the hive. It's the bee that walks past to the detriment of the hive, the community.
Thank you. I think that's a very simple way of putting the most essential thing that we've lost. Is that sense of collective responsibility, that sense of relationship, that sense, we've taken insularity to an extreme. It's the exact opposite of what Zen and Buddhism and probably all religions encourage us, that we are part of something greater. We are not isolated, and that, our actions matter because we are in the chain of causality with everything else. There's no way we can step outside of that chain.
Um, Peter, it seems to me that the message from the koan, Master Mayo, the message to us today, to be like Mayo in pursuit, is for us to move headlong into life without, without blame or without taking credit. Because I think you had said that as Master Mayo was in pursuit, or Monk Mayo, there was no good, there was no bad. He was just in pursuit. And I think looking at the piece of paper when that happened, probably many of us would pick up the paper and then also say, what a slob that guy is. And am I not such a good citizen for picking up the paper? So laying blame and taking credit. And and I think that also very, very sadly goes for the situation in Texas, where many people that comments I heard went immediately to, well, you know, what do you expect? We don't have FEMA up and running. We uh, Texas is still drilling for oil, fossil fuels, and it seems like it turned into a real opportunity for blaming without the reflection of, well, how did we uh, maybe on the political other side hasten this? How do we still hasten this? Uh, are we quick to uh, find blame and take credit for being above that? Uh, and the only other thing that is you were also talking about Joanna Macy and that she's now in hospice, and uh, I did not know that, and I'm so sorry. And it makes me think who is out there taking her place. And it seems just anecdotally, I don't know if there's historical evidence to this, but it seems like great leaders kind of come in clumps, and then there's a void, and things kind of swing back, and it takes a while for new leaders to appear. So that's just a little side thing about Joanna Macy, but we will certainly miss her voice. I guess the bigger thing is headlong into life, but try not to blame, try not to take credit. It's just what we have got. Thank you.
Thank you. Two things, two parts that I want to respond on. First, what you said about heading in straight onto life. There's the koan in which Toksan, carrying his bundle, is trying to find the monastery of what I forget the name of the teacher right now, and he comes to a fork in the road, and there's a woman selling tea cakes there by the side of the road. And he's kind of, oh, my good woman, how do I get to get there? And of course she responds enigmatically with a koan. He totally misses it, but one of the key lines is she says, "Go straight on," and he thinks that's got something to do with the fork in the road, and it makes no sense to him. But she was speaking the Dharma. Go straight on. So exactly the thing that you're saying. Fully enter life, embrace life, and do what needs to be done, essentially. Take all the, as you said, these kind of things, we're constantly raising ourselves and putting others down and creating narratives and dramas and stories, and somebody's got to pick up the fucking piece of paper. It goes back to Texas. Who's taking responsibility? Who's saying, yes, we made a mistake? Who's saying, yes, we need to do better? Everybody's blaming, right? Blaming. Putting off responsibility instead of taking, because that's how we've constructed the world right now. Like politically, it would be suicide to say, well, yep, I realize we should have acted sooner. We should have put the alarms out there or whatever. Going straight on. Not diverting. Not looking away. Okay, so that was the one part. There was something else I wanted to respond to in what you said, but now it's escaping me. Um, oh,
Macy,
what's that?
about Joanna
Oh yeah,
Macy.
yeah. So before Deborah and Doug came in, I was talking about that. I'm working this summer with a Zen student he's in Maine temporarily. He's a professor down in Massachusetts, and I forget what he's a scientist, and I forget the exact name of it's like ecological chemistry. I mean, there's a kind of one of those things. Ecology is one of the words, but then forget if it's chemistry or anyway, unimportant. But we were having exactly this conversation this weekend. He said to me, "Well, what should I be reading in Ecodharma?" And I said, "Well, there's Joanna Macy." And then I said, "Oh, and David Loy writes a lot about Ecodharma." But I couldn't, beyond that, I didn't have names for him, you know. So to your point, there will be a void, considerable void when Joanna is gone, or already because she's no longer able to teach or write or any of those things. And I don't know who's going to fill it. And yet I keep coming back to this idea that all Dharma is eco-Dharma. All Dharma is eco-Dharma. If we're practicing the Dharma, we've got to pick up the piece of paper. However that manifests in our life. It may be as simple as turning off the lights or not buying things in plastic packaging, or I don't know, all the way through to protesting whaling ships. I don't know, and everything in between. Fascinating. Do you know that they're now saying that killer whales are bringing food to humans, and the biologists are believing that it's an attempt to establish interspecies communication? So there's that other side too. But we have to be awake to respond. Doesn't that mess with our understanding of the world? That killer whales are trying to establish communication with us? And not only that, if there's multiples of them doing, that means they're all communicating that idea with one another. A total refiguring of our biological reality and our place in it.
I saw, something was pointed out to me to take a look at, read it very recently, and it was a clip. Maybe some of you saw this on the news. It was somebody was pointing a camera at an elephant, and I believe it was in the wild, and a baby gazelle had fallen in on a slope into the water. Anybody is familiar to anyone here? And it wasn't a gazelle. I think it was a baby gazelle, and the elephant walked by and looked down, and in many attempts took its trunk and pulled it out and finally rescued it. That's rather remarkable. Not a small thing. So anyway, just
Yeah,
a good,
well,
good thing to
elephants.
interject.
You know, there's a well-documented story that, and I won't do it justice at all, of a man who worked with and rescued a herd of elephants in Africa, somewhere in Africa. And at the end of his life, he lived remote from them. I don't, let's say 100 miles away. I don't know how far it was, but far. 100 miles is probably not off. And when he was laying dying, that herd of elephants knew it and trekked the 100 miles to his place and did vigil outside while he was dying. Dumb animals. Then there's lots of stories of dogs and other animals doing those types of things also.
And Peter, doesn't that also illustrate the enormous patience that these dumb animals have, that they can just withstand all the mistreatment and still be themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think that a capacity for forgiveness.
Mhm.
When I think we've mercilessly hunted killer whales for how long? And, you know, we've stopped hunting them in recent years, but for that, I'm sure that if they have an intergenerational memory, it's got to be of humans slaughtering them. And here they are holding out their, not holding out their hand, holding out their flipper. Amazing, right? Can animals have forgiveness? What does that do to our paradigm?
Well, they're operating from instinct, and maybe we're not. Maybe your message today is to operate more from instinct protecting our hive, um, rather than thinking through, well, this is not my job. I'm not to blame for this, so I'm going to just walk by. So our mind um, squelches our instincts.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's instinct. I don't know if it's instinct or something else, but clearly our intellects are a big part of our problem from directly perceiving and responding. And not that they don't have a place, they're important, right? You know, can't cook breakfast without an intellect, but at the same time.
And that's sort of what we're doing in Zazen. We're just letting go of all those thoughts, letting go of the intellect, and just being.
You know, yes. And, you know, I mean, Peter Harris talks about it a lot in terms of giving up the narratives. You know, it's through the narratives that we obstruct the Buddhist view is that compassion is our natural response. And that as we realize the truth of the one body, as we experience interconnectedness, not in an intellectual, there's the intellectual model of interconnectedness, which is basically one that Thich Nhat Hanh propagated, and not wrongly or badly, but that's kind of, like the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone idea, and it's a way for people who are not practitioners to understand this idea of interconnectedness. The rain falls, the farmer grows the crops, and so on and so forth. But that's not what the one body is. The one body is not a linear chains of causality. It's something much more profound than that. It is literal non-separation. Literally non-separation. And we can't get that here. That's why we talk about the only way to truly understand the Dharma is to realize it. The only way is to really understand that is through practice. But Thich Nhat Hanh's formulation was very pragmatic, because the strength of our egos is such that that's a long process. I don't know how long it takes. It's seldom less than 10 years, probably more 15, 20 years on the average. And so what do we do in the meanwhile? Do we just go tromping through the world, oblivious to our impact? Is hard? No. So we have this idea. The rain falls, the farmer grows the crop. The guy with the truck drives it into town. The grocer puts it on the shelf, etc. Which is just a gross approximation of the one body, but it's useful. Because 99.999% of people in the world have not directly perceived the reality of non-separation.
Peter, can I ask you to repeat what Thich Nhat Hanh said? I'd missed that. Was it a practical approach rather than a loss of narrative? I didn't understand.
No, he created a narrative way of making the idea of the one body sort of cognitively accessible to people who haven't had the direct experience, which is the vast majority of people. So he has this sort of chain of causality explanation. Everything's connected, and we can see that because, the air heats, the water vapor condenses, the rain falls, and we go on down, 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 to eventually somebody puts a head of cabbage on our table. with all the infinite, so it's all connected, which it is. But that's a very, very crude intellectual way of understanding the truth of one body. And yet it's as close as you can get intellectually, probably. If we truly understand non-separation, it's nothing like that. It's the farmer is the drop of water condensing in the rain cloud, and so on. There's no separation. It's not a chain of causality. But our brain can't get us there. We want to, we try. It's only by not thinking that we can get there. So this simultaneous reality, we are the problem and we are the solution. We drop the paper, we pick the paper up. Is that it? Have we enjoyed enough frivolity for a Sunday morning?
Picking up.
Okay. That it, Artie, that's it? Yeah, okay. So tea time to follow our vows.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.